In today's lesson, we will learn about multiplying decimals by 10. Let's just start with talking about our number system. Our number system is called the base 10 number system. And just a reminder of why that is. If we have in our ones place 10 ones, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, if we have 10 ones, each place value, once it reaches 10 in a place value, we can regroup those, and those 10 ones become 1 tens. Once we have 10 tens, they're all piled on top of each other, but there are 10 tens there. Once that place value reaches 10 of the tens, then we regroup those 10 tens into 100. Okay? Same thing with tenths. Okay? If this is my whole, okay, now we're going to move into our tenths. And this is 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6. Let's start over here. How many tenths do I have? 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths. Okay, we need 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You'll have to just trust that it would lay over that whole. Okay, so once I reach 10 tenths, those 10 tenths would be regrouped into 1 whole, and that would be my whole. So that's why our number system is called the base 10 system, because once our place value gets filled with 10, we've got to take those 10 tenths and regroup it to 1 whole. Or we need to take those 10 ones and regroup it to 1 10. Or if we have 10 tens, we need to regroup those tens into 100. So that's why our number system is called the base 10 system. So in today's lesson, we're going to look at what happens when we multiply numbers by 10, because our number is the base 10 system. So let's start by just looking at the number 12. Okay, we've made it on our place value chart. We can see that we have, in the number 12, we have 1 10 and 2 ones. Now, if we were going to multiply 12 times 10, okay, so now we have 12 groups of 10. We now then would take what's 1, let me grab my pen here. So 1 10 times 10 would give me 10 tens. So those 10 tens would need to be regrouped into 100. And if I had 2 ones times 10, so 2 ones times 10 gives me 20 ones. Those 20 ones would be regrouped into 2 tens. Okay, so notice what's happening here. Now I have 100 and 2 tens, 120. Let's look at 1. What happens if we multiply 1 times 10? Okay, so here's our 1, our place value chip of a 1 in the ones place. If we multiply 1 times 10, okay, so 1 times 10 gives us 10, and 10 ones can be regrouped into 1 10. So we have 1 place value chip in the tens place. See if you start noticing some patterns about what's happening to the number when multiplied by 10. So when we multiplied 12 by 10, it became 120. When we multiplied 1 times 10, it became 10. Are you starting to see any patterns about what's happening as we multiply by 10? you may be saying to yourself, or maybe you're saying it out loud, that you notice that as we multiply by 10, we are adding a 0 to the end. 12 times 10 is 120. We simply added a 0. 1 times 10 is 10. We simply added a 0. You may have also noticed the pattern of, well, 110 became 100, and the 2 ones became 2 tens. You may have noticed that the 1 1 became 110. You kind of notice the value of each digit becoming 10 times as great. Now let's look to see what happens when we multiply a decimal times 10. So we have 1/10, and you can see we're showing that in our place value chart with our 1 place value chip to represent 1/10. It's in the tenths column. So when we multiply 1/10 times 10, okay, we now would have 10 tenths. So let me add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we know that when a place value is filled up to 10, we need to regroup it. So 10 tenths would become 1 whole. So 10 tenths times 10 gives us 1 whole. Let's look at the decimal now, 12 hundredths. What happens when we multiply 12 hundredths by 10? Well, if we multiplied 1/10 times 10, that would leave us, like we said, 10 tenths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 2 hundredths multiplied by 10 would give us 20 hundredths. I'm not going to draw 20 little dots, but we can picture 20 of them there. And so we know that when we reach 10, we've got to regroup. So we take those 10 tenths, that becomes 1 whole. We take those 20 hundredths, and that would become 2 tenths. So 12 hundredths times 10 gives us 1 whole and 2 hundredths. So again, see what patterns you're noticing when we multiply a decimal times 10. Look to see what you notice and think it through for a minute or two. All right, so you saw that 1/10, 0.1, when multiplied by 10 became 1.0. And 12 hundredths, when multiplied by 10, became 1.2. What is changing there? What is happening? You may have noticed that the decimal point, when multiplying by 10, this decimal point moved 1 space to the right to give us 1 whole. When we multiplied 0.12 times 10, the decimal point moved 1 place to the right to give us 1.2. And in our place value chart, you can see those 10 tenths, that's being regrouped 1 place value to 1, 1. And our 10 tenths and 20 hundredths, we're each getting regrouped to the next place value up. And this again is because the value, when you multiply a number by 10, each digit, the value of each digit becomes 10 times as great. Let's look at a few more together. So if we had 16.8 or 16 8/10, let's first put that in our place value chart. And instead of using place value chips, I'm just going to put the numbers. It'll save us some time, and we can still see what we're doing. Okay, so if I were going to multiply 16.8 times 10, let's take a look at each place value. So in my tens place, if I take 110 times 10, so that's basically saying 10 times 10, that would give me 100 tens. So those 100 tens could be regrouped into 100. And in our ones place, 6 ones times 10 gives us 60 ones. Those 60 ones could be regrouped to 6 tens. And in our tenths place, 8 tenths times 10 would give us 80 tenths, which would be regrouped into 8 ones. So when we multiply 16.8 times 10, we get 168. Now look to see what happened, what changed between 16.8, 168. We multiplied by 10, and our decimal point, you probably noticed, moved one place value to the right to give us 168. And the value of each digit became 10 times greater when we were multiplying by. Now we just did 16.8. Now let's look to see what would happen if we multiplied 1.68 times 10. 1 and 68/100ths. So here we have 1, 6 tenths, and 8/100ths. So knowing what you know about multiplying by 10, think about what's going to happen to the value of each of these digits when we multiply by 10. So let's look at the ones place first. So 1 times 10 is going to give us 10 ones. So those 10 ones would be regrouped into 110. Whoops. 6 tenths, when multiplied by 10, would give us 60 tenths. Those 60 tenths would be regrouped into 6 ones. 8/100ths times 10 would give us 80/100ths, and those 80/100ths would be regrouped into 8 tens. So when we multiply 1.68 times 10, we end up with 16 and 8/10. The value of each digit increased 10 times. And you probably see also that our decimal point moved one place to the right, giving us 16.8. So let's apply this now. Without looking at a place value chart, let's apply this now to these problems. So let's start with 4.5 times 10. So I know that 4 ones, when multiplied by 10, is going to give me 40 ones. Those 40 ones would be regrouped into 4 tens. We can do tens, ones, decimal point, tenths. Okay? So I have 4 tens. 5 tenths, when multiplied by 10, would give me 50 tenths. Those 50 tenths would be regrouped into 5 ones. So 4 and 5 tenths, when multiplied by 10, would be 45. Again, you can see my decimal point moved one place to the right because the value of each of these digits, the value in the ones place became 10 times greater. The value in the tenths place became 10 times greater when multiplying. Let's look at this next one, 56/100ths times 10. So again, if I look at my 5 tenths times 10 would give me 50 tenths, and those 50 tenths would be regrouped into, I'm going to give a little abbreviation up here, those 50 tenths would be regrouped into 5 ones, and 6/100ths times 10 would give me 60/100ths. So those 60/100ths would be regrouped into 6 tenths. So 56/100ths times 10 would give me 5 and 6 tenths, or 5.6. And you may notice that when we multiply by 10, our decimal point moved one place to the right, 5 points. Why don't you look at number 3 and 4 and then check back to see if your thinking matches mine. 12 and 6/10 times 10 and 27 thousandths times 10. Again, remembering that when you're multiplying by 10, the value of each digit increases 10 times. So let's look at 12.6 times 10. If I have 110 and I multiply it by 10, that now gives me 10 tens. Those 10 tens would be regrouped into 100. If I have 2 ones, those 2 ones become 20 ones. Those 20 ones get regrouped into 2 tens. And 6/10 times 10 gives me 60 tenths. And so those 60 tenths would be regrouped into 6 ones. So 126 is the product of 12.6 times 10. You can also see that that decimal point just moved one place to the right when multiplying by 10 to give us 126. All right, looking at number 4, if we have 27 thousandths times 10, let's look at the value of each digit. So 2 hundredths, when multiplied by 10, would give me 20 hundredths. Those 20 hundredths would be regrouped into 2 tenths. 7 thousandths times 10 would give me 70 thousandths. Those 70 thousandths would be regrouped into 7 tenths. So 27 thousandths multiplied by 10 would give me 27 hundredths. And you can look to see also the decimal point when multiplying by 10 moves one place value to the right. Now let's take a look at how we can multiply decimals by tens. So you can break apart a number to multiply whole numbers. Let's look at this first example. When we multiply 3 by 20, okay, we can say, okay, well, 3 times 2, right? 3 times 2 would give us 6. So 6 times 10 would give us 60. So we know that 3 times 20 is 60. Now we can apply that same rule or same pattern when we're multiplying by decimals. So if we look at 3 tenths times 20, okay, well, we know that 3 tenths times 2 is 6 tenths, and 6 tenths times 10, well, 6 tenths times 10 would give us 60 tenths, and we would regroup those 60 tenths to 6 ones, or the decimal point moves one place to the right, leaving us with 6. So 3 tenths times 20 is 6. Let's look at 33 hundredths times 20. Well, we can take 33 hundredths times 2. 33 hundredths times 2 is 66 hundredths. And 66 hundredths times 10, well, 6 tenths times 10 is 60 tenths, which we regroup to 6 ones. 6 hundredths times 10 is 60 hundredths, which we regroup to 6 tenths. So 6.6, or if we look at that movement of that decimal point, when we multiply by 10, it moves one place value to the right, giving us 6.6, or 6 and 6 tenths. So in this lesson, we looked at multiplying whole numbers by 10. We looked at multiplying decimals by 10. And we also looked at multiplying decimals by different tens, like 20 or 30. So we looked at multiplying whole numbers and decimals by tens.